Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. So just a quick agenda. So we'll talk about the new Webiny project setup that we are working on internally. We want to show it to you really early. This isn't something that's coming next week or in 2 weeks, but we want to show you what we're working on and get your feedback as soon as possible. And yeah, we'll look into the code, see how it works, how we plan for it to work, and then we can discuss. You can ask questions about anything you like, and not even related to this talk in particular. If you just have any questions about Webiny in general, feel free to ask them, and we'll have one question for you in our quick poll, just to get some feedback from you guys. So yeah, with that, let's get started. So, current project setup and its challenges. So, over the past year, we talked a lot to various customers and users of Webiny, and we are just noting down challenges they are having and the challenges we are having as a team who is developing and who's responsible for maintaining Webiny. So, all of the problems boil down to these 6 bullet points. And number one is obviously the amount of files you get when you create your first Webiny project. It's just mind-blowing. It's way too much. It shouldn't be like that. So that's the number one thing that is currently a challenge. And it's not just overwhelming to you as our users, it's also quite difficult for us because it introduces problems when you need to upgrade Webiny, when we release new stuff. How do we upgrade that, right? There is a bunch of files in your projects. We have to write code mods. We have to test it. It's very difficult to foresee all the customizations somebody can do to the project, considering the amount of files, right? So it's on the maintenance side, it puts a lot of stress and it's very time consuming for the Webiny team. And so with that comes the next point, which is it's difficult to customize. Stuff is everywhere. Like if you want to add something, it's literally everywhere. If you want to add a piece of functionality, it's not just, oh, this is one folder, you place it here and all of a sudden it works. It's what kind of plugin is it? Oh, it's an API. Well, go into the 6th level of subfolders in the API folder, add your dependency, register your plugins, then go to admin, which is in a completely different place, right? It's difficult. It takes time to learn. It takes an enormous amount of time to maintain the documentation for all that. And it's often not up to date, right? It's very difficult to maintain docs because it's time consuming. We do some changes. We are not sure where in the docs we are referring to those things. So it's just difficult to maintain. It's also difficult for our community to publish meaningful NPM packages. What's a meaningful NPM package? So over the past months, Swapnil and I were working on a guide to contributing to Webiny in a way that you create your feature, you publish it on NPM, and people can just pull it in their project and use it. It sounds easy in theory, but when we got to actually writing down the step-by-step instructions, it became obvious that our current project setup is really very complicated to just create a plugin for everything in one NPM package. So at that point, it was clear that something is wrong. Something is definitely off here. Other stuff that people reported to us is like, we don't have build artifacts, which usually is a problem for enterprises or companies who have several environments and they would like to have a development, a staging environment. They may be like a client acceptance environment or something, and then you just grab your build artifact and you propagate it from one environment to another, and it's always the same build. You don't rebuild at deploy time. Well, that's something we don't currently have. You literally have to build at deploy time, which is a problem, especially if during deploy or right before you do the deploy, you have to install NPM dependencies. You can pull in a broken dependency, it will mess up your production build and you will know it too late, right? So it's a problem. And And one other thing is it's difficult to say whether your plugin is actually working, because TypeScript is, again, everywhere. And TypeScript configs are everywhere, in API, in admin app, in project root. It's like there is a whole bunch of TS config files spread across the project. So these are the items we identified as being the most important to solve. We have to get rid of all of these problems. So here comes the new project setup, and with which we want to completely remove the boilerplate code. So when you create a project, it will look something similar to Docusaurus, for example, or Next.js, where you have one config file and you just, configure the project, not API or admin or something. You are configuring the entire project, so the entire Webiny. And that is one place where you're adding all your plugins. So it's one config file for the entire project. And if you're not doing anything custom, then other files will just be tooling, like ESLint config, TS config, jest, stuff like that, which you can't really, get away from those. But from Webiny side, you will just have one config file. This is important because it will hopefully make upgrades really easy. You will be able to apply upgrades, and we are hoping to even make it possible to skip versions, so you don't have to, upgrade every 2 weeks when you do releases. Or if you don't upgrade for a year, you will just be able to come and say, okay, just upgrade Webiny, whatever the version is, and it will just upgrade you to that version. You don't have to manually go through every version which we released in the meantime. So that's the goal. Code-wise, it's possible. The problem is on the database migration side, so that one is still to address. Currently, this new project setup is aimed to solve some of those file management problems, if you will, like plugins and the amount of files. So Webiny plugins are remaining the same in a sense that you still have your API plugins, you still have your React app plugins and all that, but we are introducing a new layer of plugins, which is like a project level plugin, which can internally contain admin plugins and API and CLI, Pulumi and whatnot. We'll see that a bit later in the code. Build artifacts will also now be the key thing. Basically, you run build API or build admin, and you get a folder where the build artifact is, and that is what the thing that you can just then deploy. So you don't have to run deploy to get an artifact and immediately deploy it. You can build it, you can store it on S3 or whatever your storage is, and then you can pull it in a different environment and just deploy. So deploys will be possible from pre-built artifacts. So programmatic infrastructure is an interesting thing. It's currently, as you know, we have two environments which we like pre-configure for you, which is dev and prod, and there is a bunch of Pulumi configs in your project, and a lot of that code is duplicated. We got lots of questions about that, like why don't you just add ifs, or I don't know, just put it all in one environment. But the problem is that you still have the code. Recently, Pulumi released the automation API, which basically allows you to construct your Pulumi program from code at runtime without actually having Pulumi code in your project. So what this allows us to do is to completely remove all the infrastructure definition from your project. It is still there, but you get a chance to modify it via plugins at runtime. So you will be able to hook into every piece of infrastructure configuration, like every resource that we predefine. You will be able to add new resources, change configurations of the ones that we provide for you. And with that, the whole infrastructure setup becomes very flexible, because you can then have derived environments. You can say, oh, I have some kind of a test one environment, and it's based off a development, and then you apply some plugins to it. So the whole infrastructure will be removed in a sense that you won't have any more files. It will still be there, and you will have a complete TypeScript autocomplete on all the resources, all the configs and everything in your plugins. We will see that in the code demo as well. And the last thing that we really wanted to have is the ability to just go to your project root and run TSC and see if your plugins are all correct and are supposed to work, right? So anytime you upgrade Webiny, basically you'll be able to just run TSC and check your custom code against the latest Webiny version that you have installed. And you will be, with that, you will be able to tell, okay, my plugins are supposed to work. There are no type errors, and they are implemented correctly. That is currently not possible. So with the new setup, this is what we will have. So let's see one last slide before we jump into the code. Just at a high level, this is what your project will look like. If you ever created a Next.js project, it is very similar to this. You have one Webiny config TS file, which contains the whole configuration for Webiny as a whole product with all plugins, with everything. There will be a TS declaration file, which will allow you to reference all the core types, plus the augmentations. We'll talk about those in a second in the code demo. So code augmentations will be very useful to have a full autocomplete throughout your project, even for custom stuff you add, like custom configs, custom Lambda functions, and all that will be propagated across the entire setup. So you can add custom functions, and they will appear in your testing setup. So you'll be able to like have autocomplete on function names. I'll show you that as well. And I removed, as the note says at the bottom, this diagram doesn't include tooling config files. Of course, there will be ESLint, there will be jest configs, probably Bubble, all that stuff that we can't really hide, which has to live in the root of the project. But from Webiny perspective, you will pretty much have just one config file. And then if you are developing custom plugins, then you will only have one folder, which is called plugins or whatever you call it. And then you stick your plugins in there. And then you have artifacts folder, which is for all the generated and built code, which you don't need to worry about. It's nothing you have to deal with. It will just be there so we can build and deploy stuff. So with that, I think it's time to look at the code. Let's, let's switch to, just remove some of the windows. Let's switch to my WebStorm. Okay. So this is a POC. So if something dies, it's okay. I expect something to explode. I haven't yet seen a live demo without an error. So this is very similar to what I showed you in the slide. As you can see, there is a bunch of other config files, git ignores, env, and all that, but that is just the way things are. I can't remove that. The rest is my kind of simulation of what Webiny will be. So, for example, these presets and packages, this will be in node modules. This isn't something you have to worry about. Basically, what you will have is one config file. It's Webiny config TS, and when you open it, there is a utility called define project with which you define presets and you add plugins to the project, and that is your Webiny. That is it. Very similar to what Bubble config looks like. Very similar to Docusaurus, to Next.js, to Gatsby. It's all kind of, you have presets and you have custom plugins, and you can send configurations to those presets and plugins. And the rest is magic. The rest, let me show you what it looks like if you want to now, for example, build an admin app. Basically, you will just run well, commands will most likely look better than this, but you'll just have like build admin, and let's run a debug output so we see what's happening. So our CLI will load, as you can see, it's loading project config. Then from there, it identifies all the plugins. In here, you can see we have a preset, which is, again, this is just example. It's not real Webiny, like we won't see actual Webiny in here right now, but the mechanics are what we will be using in real Webiny. We're pulling plugins from presets. That's where file manager plugin comes in. And then we have Okta and e-commerce. The name is absolutely irrelevant, just something to, for demo purposes. Once we have our plugins, the system identifies what plugins contain the relevant piece of code it needs to generate the actual application. So it goes through all plugins and says, okay, you want to build an admin app. Let's see which of these plugins actually contain admin app plugins, right? So these plugins are project level, and they contain stuff for API, stuff for admin, stuff for website, Pulumi configs, and all that. But it's one plugin. It's one NPM package, which you can just publish to NPM. Then your colleagues or your clients can just pull that plugin in as a regular NPM package, and they get the whole functionality of whatever it is you were developing. So the complete feature is in one NPM package, which until now was not the case. So let's have a look at one plugin, and then later I will show you what happens with these final things here, like building artifacts and all that. So you can, and you most likely will, arrange your project as a monorepo the same way it is now, except it will be a lot simpler. You will basically just have one folder with your plugins and your regular package JSON, nothing fancy in there. You will have your source, and in here things are becoming interesting because we have these helper functions to define the project, as you have seen here. So we have define project, and to define a project level plugin, you're using define plugin. With this, you're getting full autocomplete on all these options. So this is all 100% TypeScript covered. And by the way, we are in the process of making Webiny TypeScript strict. There is a lot of work with that, but we want to be in that strict mode, so we never have any any's or anything like that in our code. So when you're writing a plugin, you can basically just say, I'm adding stuff to the admin app. And then the actual admin plugin, the one you're coding today as a React component or something, you just give me a path to that plugin. We'll go into the code just a second later. And same goes for API. You're saying, I want to extend API and I want to extend a function. Now, let me show you something very cool here. This has all the Lambda functions, which you can extend, right? You have full autocomplete on actual Lambda function names, and you get full autocomplete on the config, which you can pass in. So like handler, Webpack config overrides, function template, that's kind of more on the advanced topic, not really important right now, but you have autocomplete on that, so you don't have to guess things. And you also get the ability to add stuff, add your custom functions, like this custom handler, for example, using declarations and module augmentation, which is a super cool feature of TypeScript, where you can just say, okay, I want to extend the plugin API config, which is this here object, right? This API, this entire object, it's that. It's plugin API config. You hook into that, and then you can add your custom Lambda functions, and then you can define their types. And the same goes for configs, for admin app, for function handlers. It will all be picked up, and you will have, and not only you, but everybody who uses your plugins will have full autocomplete on all this stuff. So that is a cool thing. And yeah, so this is the project level plugin. There is more stuff in here. We will not go through every little config option. And with time, we also plan to expose some more like low-level stuff like ASTs and whatnot. It's not really relevant at this point, so I won't bother you with that. Now, all of these plugins, some of them have more code inside, some of them have less. For example, right, this plugin only adds an admin plugin, and it adds something to the GraphQL function. And how you structure that code within your project level plugin is up to you. You can make it like a flat hierarchy. You don't have to create subfolders, or if you have a rich functionality, a lot of code, you can organize it however you like. The point is that Webiny only cares about this project level plugin. And when you pass it to the project, this is what the CLI uses to generate the app. Now I'm saying generate the app because you don't have an admin app source code in your project, and you don't have API source code, and you don't have website. So where does that live, right? Okay, I have plugins, but where's my app? Well, this is where this code generation comes in. So the CLI figures out what it needs to build. It collects all the plugins, and then it uses app templates and AST to actually add your code imports and configure the whole app for you. So you don't need to go into files, look for plugins, look for arrays, how do you construct stuff? No, none of that. For that, let's dive into the artifacts, which you shouldn't worry about, but it's nice to know how things work. In here, we have two folders. One is called generated, and one is called dist. So dist is what you get when Webpack finishes its work. So this output here is basically the output in the dist folder. Now, generated is that middle step where you can get in and see what gets generated for your app based on the plugins that you have configured. And for example, this is a demo setup, right? So a simple React app. And then you go into the app TSX, and this is basically the core of everything. As you can see, we add imports for you, and we also add them to the process for loading configs, which can be asynchronous as well. We'll touch on that a bit later. We then instantiate your plugins using plugin factories and the loaded config. So again, just give me one more minute to cover this, and we'll go into more details for each of these. And then at the very end, we actually render what you know today in Webiny, this admin component, and then everything within that is a simple React element, which internally mounts menus, routes, customizes logo, I don't know, whatever it is you're doing. So basically what's changing from the app perspective is the bootstrap of it. The plugins and everything else still works, still the same. We're not even touching those. Those will continue to work as they are working today. What we are focusing on is this bootstrap, which you will no longer see, and you will not be able to tinker with it. This is something we will control, and this is what will give the system the stability, because we will not, whenever we release a change, we don't have to go through thousands of Webiny projects and try to figure out how to upgrade them. Anytime you pull in a new Webiny version, you will also get this this template file from us, and that template file will just be populated with the plugins which you enable within the project. And then that, as you can see, it is also fully TypeScript, covered with TypeScript types. So whenever we build something, it is also getting the type checks, and in the end, you get a fully working app, which then is deployed by Pulumi or whatever. You can just grab this and store it on S3, and you know that that's your working app. And the same approach works for the API. So if I run, let's do the same thing, but I'll just run build API. Yeah, I have to pass an environment, so we need to say environment of. For now, we will see. It's possible that to build actual artifacts for Lambda functions, you will not need to specify an environment, and that would be a far better thing to do. So here the process is the same, but the output is slightly different because we can have different templates for every Lambda function. Currently, we cover 3 use cases, which is we have Webiny GraphQL handler, we have Webiny non-GraphQL handler, which is still pluginable, and we have like a completely custom template. That custom template is basically do whatever you want, just write your own handler how you want it, and you would use that in things like cognito triggers, for example, pre-authenticate, post token, I don't know, stuff like that, where you just need raw handler with simple code, and you can do that. So 3 templates for now, and they should cover the majority of cases. So as you can see, we built 5 functions, and some of them, for example, the GraphQL one even has code splitting. We will get to that as well. So with this, let's take a look at the generated code for our functions. So let's cover custom handlers, the first one in the list. So this is your custom handler, right? It's like the simplest Lambda handler you can write, and this is generated using the custom template, which is basically empty. It just renders whatever you give it. Then we have, let's go for GraphQL. So GraphQL handler is a bit more complex. It collects all the plugins which you have defined for that GraphQL Lambda function, and then it generates all the imports. So in our case, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 imports, right? And then it adds that to the pipeline to execute config modifiers, which again can be asynchronous. So you no longer have to bake config parameters into the bundle. You can actually load configs from remote storage, remote API, key manager, anything, because configs can be asynchronous. It's not that they can be, they are asynchronous. You can't make them synchronous even if you wanted to. So we just went for, make it all asynchronous, because that allows code splitting, that allows API calls. And once you have your config loaded, it just passes that config to all the plugin factories. So if you want to see a comparison with the current setup, just give me a second. Yeah, I think I closed the project. Oh, okay. Oh, hang on, it's on the other monitor. So this is our repository, but if we look at GraphQL currently, what you see is this mess here. So you have a bunch of plugins, right? Lots of them are sharing same config parameters, like for example, document client. And then you have to instantiate document client somewhere higher above, and then you pass it in. I just clicked it, see this, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Like you have to pass it into every factory. If you add your own plugins, again, you have to edit here manually, pass document client and whatnot. This is now moved away to these asynchronous configs, which allow you to instantiate this once, and then other plugin factories can access it via this config object. So all this is gone. This is going away. This whole junk here, it will no longer be in your project. You will not see it here. And while I'm here, let's just quickly switch to the admin app, where you can see the same thing. So this is very similar to what we have in our new setup, which is this. Right. Let me just close this. Basically, this admin here. Yeah, let me try splitting this. Yeah. This admin here in the new setup is exactly the same component, which is this admin here in your current project, right? And then all the plugins which are currently importing manually and mounting them in here, these come from these automatic imports configured, and you can use configs to conditionally import plugins or configuring them differently, and then they get mounted automatically. So you don't have to do this manually. So that's kind of the difference. If you compare the code, it may not be very obvious immediately, but it's pretty much the same, except we have this automation step for you, so you don't have to do stuff manually. Plus, if we decide that we need to change something in the future, we come up with some new feature or something, we can just update this template, and it will, the moment you upgrade your project to that version, you will get this new template, and your plugins will be generated and processed just the same. You don't need to worry about registering them in a different file or in a different way. It will just work. Okay, moving the old project away. Let's take a look at, for example, okay, let's see an admin plugin, right? What is an admin plugin? So we will be exposing a bunch of these defined helper methods, which, so the purpose of these is to define a specific plugin for a specific part of the system. By saying I'm defining an admin plugin, we know what it is, right? You get full autocomplete on that, and we know how to process that. By saying define a handler plugin, you're basically defining a plugin for a Lambda function. Again, you get full autocomplete, and you don't have to worry how you edit. We will edit for you. You know how it works, so we'll just apply it so it just works from your perspective. So for now, we just have these. There may be one or two more added down the line. Maybe website. I think website will be the same. You will not have a website app in your project. It will be generated just the same. You just need to figure out, the extension of details which we allow for customization. In any case, it will be way more stable than the current approach, where even when we want to fix something, we need to write a code mod, then our project just falls apart. So not a very cool experience, not for you, not for us, and yeah, it doesn't help the stability. So one thing I want to comment on is this, which may look weird, is this like config, then it returns a function which gets next, and then you return plugins, and then again you call all that. So this is very similar to your, I don't know, Redux middleware, probably. Yeah, I think, yeah. Or I don't know, an Express middleware, where you basically you do something and then you call the next middleware, right? This is a very flexible pattern which allows you to intercept plugins, which, for example, currently you can't do it. In your current Webiny project, you would have to specifically target a place where you register your plugin in order to intercept something. With this, you get a chance to completely override all plugins that are being executed, and same goes for configs. Config modifiers work the same way. They get this next, and they get the current config which is generated. And the same approach works for Lambda functions. So it's basically everything works the same way. You get a chance to control the order of application of your config changes, your plugins. You can completely ignore everything and just return an array of whatever plugins you want and ignore all the other plugins. So this is very flexible. This helps with many things. Like, for example, while you're developing on your local machine, you can have 5 plugins which are loading partial configurations, right? One plugin needs something for security, another plugin needs themes, for example, and the third plugin needs file types, like for the file manager, right? When you go to production, you may not want to process every plugin individually and doing some kind of API calls or something within each plugin individually. Then you can just create something like this external config plugin, which again, it was me coming up with examples to explain how cool this is, because it is hard to just to explain a thing without having like a real life example. So an external config is a very good example where you would just ignore all the previously registered plugins and just return a giant config coming from like a key store or from an API, or maybe it's even hard coded. What you see here is I'm ignoring this. Let me clear this up slightly. I'm ignoring the next callback, which basically is ignoring all the plugins that are registered before this one, and you just return the giant config. So others will not be processed. If they're asynchronous, they will not be doing anything. They will just be completely ignored. And with this, you can configure your, for example, production deployments where you don't want to waste time loading configs from 5 sources. You actually just aggregate everything into one. So this is like one of the examples for where this middleware type of approach is very flexible. What you see here, these keys, they're also covered by TypeScript. We have this type called admin config, and basically every plugin can augment that using a declaration. Like here, for example, let's add a new key, literally a new key, and I want this to be a number, right? And now if I go into my config here, I see my new key, and it's a number, right? So now you no longer need to guess. You have full TypeScript on this, and you will not be able to build an app and accidentally break things because you forgot to add a key to your config. This will yell if you just start, if you build it, right? If you check it with TypeScript. So this this was a major focus for us. We no longer, like we don't want to have a system which you can accidentally deploy. I mean, you don't deploy accidentally, you run the deploy, but you may accidentally forget to add a config key somewhere, and then the system breaks. And especially in production, we don't want to risk that. So with module augmentation, we get complete TypeScript coverage, right? And your clients or other teammates, they will also have all this in their code, and it will be enabled for them. So declaration files are super useful. Very cool, cool stuff. We'll document everything. Although there is a bunch of docs in the TypeScript universe about module augmentation, but it's confusing. So we will document this properly in the context of Webiny. Let me start this app just quickly so we can. Yeah, we also have watch. Let's see that. So this is not like a Webpack dev server, but it will do. It will rebuild, and then we can do serve artifacts dist. Yeah. Okay, let's have a look at this. There we go. This is our generated app. It actually works. Ooh, no errors. Sometimes. Okay, as you can see, these logs, these are debug logs, of course. Loading configs, this performs asynchronous config application. Then we get the full config, then we initialize plugins with that config. And in the end, everything is rendered. And as you can see, I have the same component mounted twice, but from 2 different plugins with different props, and obviously they work differently. And this is what you see in the component. So our regular admin app, and then the plugins. Let's quickly switch back, and I'll just show you the actual code here, which is this. So you define an admin plugin, right? You process all the previous plugins that are registered before you, and then you add your new plugin, which is, in this case, a React component, right? An element. And then in here, you can do whatever you want. So if we imagine that this is already a Webiny, like completely migrated, then this is where you would write like add menu, all that stuff, add route, and all that. So your functionality becomes collocated very nicely. You have your admin stuff, which can be as simple or as complex as you write it. you get your API stuff. Again, plugins go, you define a handler plugin, and then you would just register page builder, file manager, whatever. So that mess you currently have in your project, that will all be now part of these project level plugins, and they will be nicely grouped into meaningful features. One other thing I want to show is Pulumi. So Pulumi is super cool in this, using the automation API. It's really interesting. Let's take a look at Pulumi. So here, looks familiar, but it's slightly different. The only actual change to how you work with Pulumi now is that you will not be instantiating resources yourself. You will not be doing, so far you did like table equals new, and then you instantiate the resource, right? And you pass it config. You will not be able to do this. Instead, you have this app, and the app is API or admin or website. It's just like an instance of a Pulumi program, which you use to add stuff to. And if you want to add, for example, a Lambda role, sorry, it's not a Lambda role, it's IAM role, you just say add resource, and instead of instantiating it, you just pass in the constructor, and then you pass in the config. And this is all typed with TypeScript, of course. This is complete Pulumi type. So everything is accessible just like before, but we need this add resources so we can delay the construction of every resource. What this does is it gives us the ability to modify resources from other plugins. So let's say you have a plugin which needs to add a new GSI to Dynamo table. You don't need to go into Pulumi config, dig through files, and oh, here's where the table is instantiated, right? What you can do is, let me show you because I have an example of this. You can just access the table directly from a module. I won't go into details about modules. Modules are just like groupings, logical groupings of Pulumi within an application. It's nothing super smart. It just gives you access to meaningful chunks of functionality, basically. And let me show you this. So octa dot, and you get autocomplete on resources which are created in every module. And let's say you want to change Dynamo table, you literally change it. You just go into config and oh, there we go. How cool is that? Like you just reference any attribute which is exposed by Pulumi and you change it. If you need to add a new GSI, there you go. You just add it there. You can change names of resources, runtimes, like everything. There is no point in even saying what you can change because you basically can do everything. And then you can add your outputs. So if you're writing like raw Pulumi, you would just return an object. In our case, you would just say, okay, this is my app, add an output Lambda. And now when you run it, let me run it, and you'll see this will be, I think it's the deploy API. Let's do def and preview. What's this? Oh, great. Close the whole terminal accidentally. Yeah. API so dev and preview. Okay, so we have this, right? Now let's apply some changes. Let's apply some changes and see how this works. One very useful thing that is possible with this approach of kind of wrapping the Pulumi and making it modifiable through code is you can now control every resource that's getting instantiated. But in our case, I just want to control the name of a resource. So there is a config for that. You just say resource, where is it? Oh, sorry, it's forgot it just returns an object. So there we go. Resource name. And you get the original resource name, and then you can just return a custom. So let's say my resource for environment env, then just append the original name. So now look what happens when we run that same deploy. This resource name modifier will be applied to every resource that gets instantiated anywhere in the Pulumi config. And now you see, hey, this is your pattern, right? You can now control how you name everything. In the same way, you can tag stuff. You can based on the environment that is being deployed, you can do all kinds of modifications that your project requires. And yeah, you just configure this in one on the project level, and then all resources ever created within the project will go through this modifier. We can also do tags like resource tagging and that kind of stuff. So yeah, this is pretty cool. And if you just disable, for example, I have this e-commerce plugin. It has a Pulumi plugin which adds, I think it adds Lambda function. If I just disable that plugin, this will yell at me if I don't comment out. If we just disable a plugin, you will see that it will be gone. It will just say, hey, I need to delete stuff, right? So because our original app has just the role and the DynamoDB table, but Lambda was added with that plugin, which I just disabled. And the moment you disable the plugin, all of a sudden you get a different Pulumi config, and yeah, it will do its thing. But with this, we cover the complete feature-based plugin scope. We have the ability to add stuff everywhere in the system. We have the ability to change infrastructure from your plugin, and there will be more, probably CLI plugins and stuff like that. But it is all co-located, and you can now package it and ship it as a meaningful unit on NPM, and then share it, sell it, do whatever you want. Yeah. Let's just So one last thing is probably running TSC, which will check for TypeScript. Not a whole lot we will see here, but now you can do this, and it will verify all your plugins, whatever you're writing, against your installed version of Webiny, and that is pretty much it. I think with this we covered the majority of not the majority, but actually all of those bullet points that we went through. And it's 3:49. One more minute. I just want to show you how type augmentation reflects on tests. This is also a very cool thing, because we have a package which allows you to just say, I want to test a particular Lambda handler, and you don't want to do any imports and requires anything like that. What you want to do is just tell him, hey, I want to load a handler, and you get a full autocomplete on all of your available handlers. So you cannot misspell this, right? If I just type something, it will tell me, sorry, dude, there is no such handler. So you will be really nicely supported with types. And tests work as well. I have some dummy tests. I mean, they actually work, but not very useful. But yeah, it runs and it loads the appropriate handler. It executes everything. So yeah, this is kind of where we got so far. I will now stop. Well, I think we went through the majority of what I wanted to show you, and let's hear your comments, questions. I hope there are some. You can post them in chat, by the way. If you're in a noisy place, and feel free to post questions to our chat.
Hi, Pavel. Have I pronounced it right, Pavel?
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. I just want to say I really enjoyed that. It's good hearing your improvements, and I love that you've got all the community involved. in this video call as well. I was just wondering, I was just thinking about sort of future developments for Webiny. Where do you sort of see it going in terms of that?
I mean, like product-wise?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, right now we have quite an extensive list of improvements that we are working on the headless CMS. So the headless CMS will definitely receive a lot of love, and we can say the same for the page builder. We have huge plans for the page builder, and those two are very important to us, and probably for the community as well, because we've been talking about dynamic pages for ages now, but every time we ran into something that like it makes dynamic pages either impossible to implement, or if we implement that first, dynamic pages will be a lot cooler, you know?
Yeah.
So right now we are preparing the ground for actually pulling off dynamic pages in a very cool way. So it works seamless between headless CMS and the page builder. Yeah.
Thank you. And how do you sort of see that being different from the sort of Squarespace and those sorts of web design?
Actually, yeah. So Squarespace it's more like you open your page and you build it, right? You tweak your pixels left and right, drop in content. With our approach would be page builder will work as a template builder. Think of it that way, right? You will build your template. You will be able to style it definitely and add elements, static elements, dynamic elements, whatever. But every time you create an entry in the headless CMS, we will use that template to generate the actual page with the content from the headless CMS, right? So if you generate 10,000 records in the headless CMS, you can even do it via an API, right? You can do an import or something, and it will generate 10,000 static pages for you with that content. So you will not have to manually go publish or pull in data. It will be automatic. That is kind of the idea. So page builder as template builder in that sense.
Maybe just to jump in there earlier. So when you look at Squarespace, right, it's a closed box.
Yeah.
What you get, and if you don't like it, well, nothing you can do about it, right? But that's where our approach is very, very different, right? We give you a page builder and a headless CMS that are open source, but not just open source. We've built the plugin system, like the lifecycle events, the hooks into every part of that system, so you can customize it to your needs. And with that, you have the full control of the elements presented there, the workflows, the integrations with other systems, and your data is pretty much within your cloud. We don't ask you to trust us with that. Like, you have the full ownership of it. So that's kind of where we differentiate quite a lot from the other solutions on the market. And there's a third also pillar to what Pavel mentioned, where our investments currently are going to, and that is the Webiny control panel. We don't just want to give you a content management system. We want to give you also the tools on top of that system so you can effectively manage it, be that staged rollouts, feature flags, monitoring of cloud costs, monitoring of performance. So there's the CMS, right? But then there's this control panel that gives you that operational excellence for when you need to truly scale and properly manage that. But it's gonna, just being serverless saves you anywhere between 60 to 80% of the costs compared to other open source solutions. But this is going to bring it into the 90+ percentile range. Not just cost savings, but also that site reliability and that operational excellence is going to be way, way better than compared to any other solutions in the market.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ben.
Okay, we have some questions in the chat. So, is there a community version of multi-tenancy available? We were interested in playing around with it when it launches. Sven, do you care to take this one?
So, no, there's no community edition of multi-tenancy available. Multi-tenancy is a paid-for feature. However, right? Today we do understand like, hey, there's the open source version and there's then the very expensive enterprise version, and it doesn't fit everybody's bill, right? But with the Webiny control panel, we'll be introducing a business tier that's going to have a free tier in it, and then it's going to scale at $9 per user per month. That business tier is going to have multi-tenancy opened. So essentially, you will be able to use multi-tenancy for free on one user. And then as you scale out, the cost is going to be based on the user, and you won't require the enterprise license anymore. So we're just bringing that price point down from an enterprise edition to that business edition at a much cheaper cost.
Okay, thank you, Sven. I'll take the other part of the question. So I would, when will the switchable configurations be available, basically? Well, what I showed you today, it's currently, like I finished the POC, and we are now trying to plan the implementation to see, when we will be able to roll this out. We still haven't discussed if it's going to be like Webiny version 6, most likely, purely because the setup is so different that we don't want to, you accidentally upgrading to it and not being able to run anything, like messing up your project. So yeah, even though if you have developed custom plugins for the existing version of Webiny, that code will still work. You will just import it differently using the approach I described today. You will basically just, wrap it into the project level plugin, and the same code will work. No changes there. But it will most likely be version 6. And it will be sometime this decade. No, kidding. We are looking at it as soon as possible. Literally, it's a big thing for us, because we are wasting a lot of time on managing upgrades and project migrations and everything. It's just a huge time consumer. So the sooner we get this out, the sooner we save time for you and for ourselves. Watch out for announcements and all that, and we'll definitely not keep this to ourselves. The moment we know some kind of timeline, we will most likely share it on the community Slack. Does the app initialize all the API functions on init? Depends on what do you mean by init. When you deploy, it's Cloud is the existing already created resource. Oh, you can. So if you just run deploy, let's start with the default setup, right? If you run deploy, it's only then when the functions will be created. It's the same as it's working today. It's literally the same. If you want to swap some of the resources, then you will just use Pulumi mechanisms to pull in references to existing resources. There are ways to achieve that. If, for example, if you have a DynamoDB table which you already have and want to use, you can reference that. So you don't have to create a new DynamoDB table. Pulumi does support that. I hope that answered the question. How do I know what's happening inside CloudFront and API Gateway or any resource, right? Well, you will just have to look at GitHub at the packages which make or are responsible for that part of infrastructure. I mean, there is no other way. If that's the only downside, to hiding the code from you, then I think it's not a huge downside. Like functionality will be grouped into a lot more sensible pieces. Like there will be a base config, you will have your I18N, page builder, headless CMS. So there will be new packages introduced which encapsulate all of these pieces of functionality which are currently spread across everywhere. API packages, app packages, Pulumi infra in your project. So all that will now be a lot more organized, and it will be easier for you to see like what makes page builder, for example. You'll just go into that package and it will find everything that it is importing or configuring for Pulumi. Any idea when the control panel is launching? Sven, do you have any idea when the control panel is launching?
So anybody that's interested in the Webiny control panel, we will start onboarding some early alpha users probably towards the end of next month. These are going to be hand onboarded by either myself or Pedro, but that's the alpha release. The public beta release, so beta edition that anybody can join, will be launched towards the end of next quarter. There's just a lot of functionality we want to get into the WCP, and it's a very complex piece of feature sets we want to deliver, so it's taking some time. But anybody that's interested, please reach out either to myself or Pavel or Swapnil, and we'll add you to the list. But we'll also soon update our website where anybody can join that waiting list, and we will slowly move our way through the waiting list, as I said, towards the end of next month, and manually onboard the early alpha users and kind of work with them on getting some feedback.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining and the great questions you asked. And Pavel, thank you so much for the great thing the team and you are doing for making things simpler for us and the community. So, and thanks for your timing. Thank you, everyone. It was really nice to have you all, and see you soon in the next community call.
If you guys come up with more questions, feel free to reach out on Slack. You know, we're already there, so